I want you to imagine something for a moment. You have spent 53 years building a life. You raised children who called you mama with sticky fingers and scraped knees. You held your husband's hand through surgeries, through grief, through the slow quiet of old age settling into your bones. You cooked 10,000 meals. You saved every birthday card. You trusted. You loved without conditions or fine print. And then one Tuesday morning, while the sunlight came through the kitchen curtains the way it always did, while the coffee was still brewing and the world felt perfectly ordinary, you found a phone that was never meant to be found. And on that phone was a voice you had known since the moment it first cried into the world. And that voice was saying, "She won't remember, Derek. Just get her to sign." That sentence, those 8 words, they did not just break a heart. They dismantled a reality. They rewrote 53 years in 8 seconds flat. My name is Eleanor Voss. I am 71 years old. I have arthritis in my left hand, a weakness for peach cobbler, and apparently, a daughter who believed that age had turned me into something easy to steal from. This is my story, and I am telling it myself, because some stories are too important to let anyone else hold. But before I go any further, if you are new here, please take a moment and subscribe. Hit that bell, because the stories I share in this space are real, they are raw, and they are the kind that remind every single one of us that the greatest dangers in life do not always come from strangers. Sometimes they come wrapped in the faces of the people we love most. And I never want you to miss a single one. Also, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? Whether you are sitting in your living room in Texas, drinking tea in London, or watching from somewhere I have never even heard of, tell me, because knowing you are out there, wherever you are, is what makes telling this story feel worth it. Now, let me take you back to the morning it all began. It was a Wednesday in late October, the kind of morning where the air smells like wood smoke and wet leaves and something ending. My husband Gerald had passed 4 months earlier. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless, the way that disease tends to be. We had 61 days between diagnosis and goodbye, and I had spent every one of them at his side. After he was gone, the house became a museum of him. His reading glasses on the end table, his cardigan on the hook by the back door, his nightstand, untouched, exactly as he had left it. I had avoided that nightstand for 4 months. I am not ashamed to say it. Some grief is not ready to be sorted through. Some drawers are not ready to be opened. But on that Wednesday morning, something in me shifted. Maybe it was the season, maybe it was that I had finally cried every tear my body had stored up. Whatever it was, I put on my housecoat, walked into the bedroom, sat down on Gerald's side of the bed, and I began to clean. I found the usual things first. A crossword puzzle book, half finished, his neat handwriting filling the little squares, a tube of the mentholated cream he rubbed on his knuckles at night, a photograph of us from 1987, standing in front of a lake in Vermont, squinting into the sun. I held that photograph for a long time. Then I reached further back, past the water glass, past the old receipts, into the dark corner at the very back of the drawer, and my fingers touched something cold and smooth and rectangular. I pulled it out, thinking it was an old television remote, something Gerald had stashed and forgotten. But it was not a remote. A newer iPhone, slim and dark, in a plain black case I had never seen before. Gerald had an old Samsung that I helped him replace the cracked screen on just last year. He had never owned an iPhone in his life. I sat there for a long time just holding it, the way you hold something when your brain has not yet caught up to what your hands have found. Then I pressed the side button, and the screen lit up. No passcode. Whoever had put this phone here had not expected anyone to find it, or had not expected the person who found it to be sharp enough to know what to do next. My daughter Patrice called me 20 minutes later. She did this most mornings, a habit she had kept since her father got sick. It had always felt like love. Standing there holding that phone, I realized for the first time it might have been something else entirely. It might have been surveillance. "Morning, Mama," she said. "How are you feeling today?" "Tired." Which was true. "I was thinking of coming by this weekend," she said. "Help you go through some of Daddy's things. You really shouldn't leave his room the way it is. It's not good for you. I told her that sounded fine, that I would make her favorite soup, that I loved her. Then I hung up the phone, my phone, and stared at the strange one in my other hand. Patrice had a boyfriend named Derek Hale. I had met him 3 times. Quiet man, watchful eyes, the kind of person who, when he shook your hand, made you feel like he was calculating something. I had mentioned this to Gerald once, and Gerald had said, "Eleanor, you've always been a better judge of character than me." He had smiled when he said it, but he had not disagreed. I pressed the camera roll icon on the iPhone. There were 11 videos, and I pressed play on the first one. Whoever had recorded it had not meant to. The phone must have been sitting at an angle partially covered, the lens catching only a sliver of the room. But the audio was perfectly clear. Crystal clear. The kind of clarity that feels almost cruel in hindsight. Because there is no room for misunderstanding, no static to hide behind, no way to say later that you heard it wrong. I recognized the room immediately from the background sounds. The particular creak of the 3rd floorboard, the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. This video had been recorded inside my own house. Derek's voice came first, low and steady, the voice of a man who had done this kind of thinking before. "How long does she usually sleep in the afternoons?" And then Patrice, my daughter, my first child, the one I had rocked through colic and kindergarten nightmares and a broken engagement at 26. Her voice was different in this video, not the warm syrup of the woman who called me every morning. This voice was clipped, efficient, the voice of someone conducting a meeting. At least 2 hours, sometimes 3 since Daddy passed. She takes the same pills she's always taken. She won't wake up. A pause. The sound of paper shuffling. We have to move before the estate gets complicated. Once the attorney gets involved with the full inventory, it gets harder. Derek again. And she'll sign it? A longer pause this time. And then the sentence I will carry in my chest for the rest of my life. She won't remember, Derek. Just get her to sign. I stopped the video. I sat on the edge of Gerald's bed in the October morning light, and I breathed, just breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way the grief counselor had taught me after Gerald passed, because my body had gone somewhere strange, not crying, not shaking, something quieter and colder than either of those things. Something that felt like the ground disappearing beneath a house you thought was built on solid rock. I want to tell you something about betrayal. Real betrayal, the kind that comes from inside the family, inside the love. It does not announce itself with noise. It does not arrive screaming. It arrives the way this moment arrived, in total silence, in ordinary morning light, while the coffee was still warm on the counter, and the birds were still doing whatever birds do in October. It arrives so quietly that for a moment you wonder if you imagined it. And then you press play again, because you did not imagine it, and you need to be sure. I watched all 11 videos. I will not describe every one of them to you in detail, because some of what I heard I am still not ready to repeat out loud. But I will tell you the shape of what I learned. Over what appeared to be several weeks of recorded conversations, some in my house, some clearly in Patrice's apartment based on the different acoustics. Derek and my daughter had been constructing a plan. A careful, patient, methodical plan. Gerald had left behind a life insurance policy, a retirement account, and the deed to a property in the mountains that had been in his family for 3 generations. Together, those things represented the financial security I was meant to live on for the rest of my life. The home I was meant to pass to my grandchildren one day. The dignity my husband had spent decades building for us. Derek, it turned out, was not simply Patrice's boyfriend. He was also, according to one of the later videos, someone with significant debt. The kind of debt that makes people creative in very dark ways. In one recording, he mentioned a figure, a number spoken casually, the way you mention the weather, and I had to replay it twice, because I could not believe a person could owe that much money and still walk around smiling at Sunday dinners. Patrice knew about the debt. She had known for a long time. And somewhere along the way, in some conversation I was not in the room for, a decision had been made. The plan, as I understood it from the videos, involved getting me to sign over power of attorney to Patrice. Framed, they discussed, as something sensible, something protective. Lots of widows do it, Patrice said in one video. We just tell her it so someone can manage things if she gets confused. She'll think it's practical. Derek had laughed at that. Not a big laugh. Just a small, satisfied sound. The kind of sound that told me this was not his first time. I watched the last video. In it, Patrice was alone, speaking directly into the camera, though I do not think she knew she was being recorded either. She was making some kind of list out loud, ticking things off under her breath. The mountain property, the insurance payout, the account Gerald had never told me the full balance of because he handled the finances, and I had trusted him to, and I had trusted her to respect that trust once he was gone. She got to the end of her list, and she paused, and she said almost to herself, by the time she figures any of this out, it'll be done. I put the phone down on the nightstand, Gerald's nightstand, next to the photograph of us in Vermont in 1987, squinting into the sun. Then I stood up, went to the bathroom, washed my face with cold water, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. 71 years old, arthritis in my left hand, a widow of 4 months, and absolutely, completely, icily clear in my mind about exactly what I was going to do next. I went back to the bedroom. I picked up the iPhone. I picked up my own phone. I called no one. I wrote nothing down. I simply got dressed, put both phones in my purse, picked up my car keys, and walked out the front door into the cold October air. I drove straight to the bank. I want you to understand something about the drive to that bank. It was 14 minutes door to door. I have made that drive hundreds of times in my life. To deposit Gerald's paychecks in the early years when we were just starting out, to open the savings account we started for Patrice when she was born, to sit across from a loan officer in 1994 and sign the papers for the mountain property, Gerald squeezing my hand under the table because we were terrified and thrilled in equal measure. 14 minutes of familiar roads, familiar storefronts, the same bakery on the corner that has been there since before Patrice could walk. But that morning, those 14 minutes felt like traveling through a country I no longer recognized. Because the woman driving the car was not quite the same woman who had woken up that morning. Something had hardened in me. Not bitterness exactly. Something more useful than bitterness. Clarity. The particular cold clarity that comes when you realize the situation is serious, and that you, and only you, are in a position to stop it. I parked in the bank's small lot, turned off the engine, and sat for exactly 60 seconds. I counted them deliberately. I had learned a long time ago, back when Patrice was a teenager, and we used to fight about things that seem so small now, that you should never walk into an important confrontation still shaking. You wait, you breathe, you arrive as the steadiest version of yourself. The branch manager's name was a young man called Marcus Webb. I had met him once before, briefly, when Gerald and I had come in to update our beneficiary information the previous spring. He had been professional and kind and had offered us coffee, which Gerald had accepted and I had declined. He could not have been more than 35. Dark suit, careful haircut, the kind of young man who takes his job seriously, because he understands what it means for people like me to trust an institution with everything they have worked for. I asked the teller at the front if I could speak with Mr. Webb directly. She looked at me with polite uncertainty and asked if I had an appointment. I told her I did not, but that it was urgent, and that I believed it involved potential fraud on my account. That word, fraud, changed the temperature of the conversation immediately. The teller excused herself, disappeared behind a door, and returned in under 2 minutes. Webb would see me right away. I followed her to his office, a small glass-walled room near the back of the branch. He stood when I entered, hand extended, face already arranged into the careful professional expression of someone who handles sensitive situations. We shook hands. I sat down. He sat across from me, and I placed both phones on the desk between us. My phone and the phone I had found in Gerald's nightstand. I placed them side by side, and I folded my hands and I looked at him. And I said, I need you to tell me if anything has been changed on my accounts in the last 90 days, and then I need you to listen to something. He pulled up my account on his computer. I watched his eyes move across the screen. He was good at keeping his face neutral, the training of someone who has delivered bad news before, without letting the room panic before it needs to. But there was a moment, just a flicker, where something shifted behind his eyes. He looked at the screen, and then he looked at me, and there was something in that look that told me, before he said a single word, that they had already started. "Mrs. Voss," he said carefully, "can I ask, are you aware of a power of attorney document that was submitted to this branch approximately 3 weeks ago?" The room did not spin. I had expected something, not those exact words, but something in that territory. I kept my hands folded, I kept my voice level. "I am not," I said. "Tell me everything." What Marcus Webb told me in the next 10 minutes rearranged the architecture of the last 3 weeks of my life. A power of attorney document had been submitted, bearing what appeared to be my signature, designating Patrice Voss Harmon as having full financial authority over my accounts. The document had been reviewed and was in the process of being processed, but had not yet been fully activated due to a standard waiting period the branch required for accounts over a certain threshold. Gerald's accounts, now transferred to my name following his death, had pushed the total well past that threshold. That waiting period, a routine procedural requirement that had nothing to do with suspicion and everything to do with policy, was the only thing standing between Patrice and access to everything. I had arrived with 6 days to spare. Marcus Webb was young, but he was not naive. When I told him I had not signed that document, his face did something I will never forget. The professionalism did not disappear, but underneath it, something went white. The specific white of a person who suddenly understands the full weight of what is sitting on their desk. He asked me very quietly if I would be willing to let him see what was on the second phone. I unlocked it, opened the camera roll, and handed it across the desk without a word. He watched the first video, then the second. Halfway through the third, he set the phone down, picked up his desk phone, and said to whoever answered, "I need compliance on the line right now, and please call the branch security officer." He hung up and looked at me and said, "Mrs. Voss, I have to be very direct with you. What I am looking at constitutes fraud. I am going to need to contact the authorities." "I know," I said. "That is why I came." He looked at me for a moment with an expression I was not expecting, not pity, not the soft, uncomfortable look people give elderly women when they assume the story is tragedy and nothing else. It was something closer to respect. "How are you doing?" he asked. Just that, simple and direct. And for the first time since I had pressed play on that first video, I felt my throat tighten. But because someone had thought to ask, "I am managing," I told him, and I meant it. Within 20 minutes there were 2 police officers in that glass-walled office. Within an hour there was a detective. I told my story 3 times, clearly and completely, and each time I told it, I felt less like a victim and more like a witness, because that is what I had chosen to be. Not a woman things had happened to. A woman who had seen clearly, acted quickly, and walked through the right door before it was too late. Outside the glass walls of that office, the ordinary bank morning continued. Tellers counting cash, a young couple opening their first joint account, an old man making a withdrawal in careful, deliberate steps. All of it proceeding as if the world were entirely normal, which for them it was. For me, nothing would be normal again for quite some time, but I was still standing, and I still had everything Gerald had worked to leave me. Patrice did not know any of this yet. Patrice called me at 2:17 that afternoon. I know the exact time because I was sitting in my kitchen with a cup of tea that had gone cold, staring at nothing in particular, and my phone lit up on the table in front of me like a small, glowing accusation. Her name on the screen. The name I had chosen for her 44 years ago, sitting in a hospital bed with Gerald beside me. Both of us young and frightened, and so full of hope it almost hurt. Patrice. I had always loved that name. I have complicated feelings about it now. I let it ring 4 times. Then I picked up. "Mama, just checking in. How are you feeling today?" The same warm voice. The morning voice. The voice that had called me every day since Gerald got sick, and that I had mistaken all this time for devotion. I understood now that what I had been hearing was not devotion. It was a woman keeping careful track of whether her plan was still on schedule. "I am fine," I told her. "Just a quiet day." "You sound tired," she said. "I am tired," I said, which was the truest thing I had said in weeks. She told me she was thinking of bringing soup on Saturday. I told her that would be lovely. We spoke for 4 more minutes about nothing. The weather, a television program she had watched, whether my neighbor's dog had finally stopped barking at all hours. 4 minutes of the most ordinary conversation in the world, conducted between a woman who had tried to steal her mother's life savings and the mother who now knew it. When we hung up, I sat very still for a long time. Not because I was shattered, but because I was memorizing that feeling, the specific texture of a love that had been revealed as something else, so that I would never confuse those two things again. The detective assigned to the case was a woman named Sandra Okafor, 40-something, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of person who took notes in a small, precise handwriting that told you she had heard everything before and was not easily surprised. She had come to the bank that morning and then come to my house that afternoon, and she sat across from me at my kitchen table and walked me through what would happen next with the patience of someone who understood that this was not just a legal matter. It was a family matter, and those, she told me gently, are always the hardest kind. The fraudulent power of attorney document was now in police custody. A forensic documents examiner would analyze the signature. The videos from the phone had been transferred as evidence. Marcus Webb had formally flagged the account and frozen all pending changes. Derek Hale, it turned out, was not unknown to the local police department. His name had surfaced in a previous financial investigation 2 years earlier involving an elderly woman in a neighboring county, a case that had ultimately not resulted in charges due to a lack of documentation. Detective Okafor said this with a very specific flatness in her voice that told me she had always believed he was guilty and had spent 2 years waiting for another chance to prove it. I had just handed her that chance on a plain black iPhone. "You did everything right," she told me, closing her notepad. "Most people in your situation, they confront the family member first. They call and ask questions. They give the other person a chance to explain or deny or disappear with whatever they can grab before anyone official gets involved." She looked at me steadily. "You went straight to the bank. That made all the difference." I told her about the 60 seconds I had sat in the parking lot, about counting them deliberately, about deciding to be the steadiest version of myself before walking through that door. She smiled at that, a small, real smile that broke briefly through the professional composure. 60 seconds, she said. That might be the smartest thing I have heard all month. Patrice was contacted by police 3 days later. I was not present for that conversation, and I am glad I was not. I have imagined it many times, the way you cannot help imagining things you know happened, but did not see. The knock at the door, the badges, the moment when the carefully constructed plan, the one built on the assumption that her mother was too old and too grieving and too trusting to look clearly at the world, the moment that plan met the reality of what her mother had actually done. I imagine her face in that moment, and I feel something I do not have a clean word for. Not satisfaction, not grief, something in between. Something that belongs specifically to the experience of being a parent who has been deeply wronged by a child they still love. Derek Hale was arrested 4 days after that. The previous case in the neighboring county was reopened. 2 other families came forward within the week. He had, it appeared, been doing versions of this for years, moving through relationships with practiced patience, identifying vulnerability. Patrice, I have had to accept, was both a participant in what he planned for me and in some complicated way I am still untangling, a person who had herself been reshaped by someone skilled at reshaping people. That does not absolve her, but it is part of the truth, and I have always believed that the full truth is the only kind worth holding. The mountain property is still mine. Gerald's retirement account is still mine. The insurance policy paid out as it was meant to, into the account where it has always been, untouched and intact. I have since met with an attorney, a real one I chose myself, one whose name I found independently, and whose office I walked into alone. I have put proper legal protections in place. Not because I am confused or in need of managing, but because I am 71 years old, and I understand now, in a way I did not before that Wednesday morning, that clarity is something you must protect as fiercely as any other asset you own. Gerald's nightstand has been cleaned out now. I kept the crossword puzzle book, the photograph from Vermont, and the mentholated cream that still smells like his hands. Everything else I sorted through carefully, the way you sort through anything valuable, slowly, with attention, making sure you do not discard something important by accident. The iPhone I gave to Detective Okafor, I did not want it in my house. Some objects carry too much of what happened inside them, and you have to let those go. I still make peach cobbler on Sunday afternoons. I still drink my coffee by the kitchen window, where the morning light comes through the curtains. I still talk to Gerald sometimes, quietly, in the particular silence of a house that used to hold 2 people, and now holds 1. I told him what happened in one of those quiet conversations. I told him I found the phone. I told him I drove to the bank. I told him I was okay. I like to think he already knew. He always said I was a better judge of character than him. Maybe he hid that phone where I would find it eventually, because some part of him, even in those last 61 days, was still looking out for me. I cannot know that for certain, but I am allowed to find comfort in the possibility, and I do. To every person watching this right now, and I know you are out there, in your living rooms, to the phone in the drawer you have never seen before, to the voice that sounds warm, but calls at the same time every day, with a consistency that feels less like love and more like clockwork. To the document someone asks you to sign quickly, casually, as if it is nothing, as if you are the kind of person who signs things without reading them. You are not that person. I am not that person. And if anyone in your life has made the mistake of believing otherwise, let them find out the way Derek Hale found out, and the way my daughter found out, on an ordinary Wednesday in October, when a 71-year-old woman, with arthritis in her left hand, pressed play on a video she was never supposed to find, and then drove calmly and deliberately, and with complete clarity of purpose, straight to the bank. I still know how to press play. And so do you. If this story moved you, if it made you think of someone you love or something you need to check on, or a conversation you have been putting off, share it. Pass it along. You never know whose Wednesday morning it might change. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do it now, because there are more stories in this space, and every single one of them was lived by someone who deserved to have it told. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. And remember, wherever you are watching from, drop it in the comments.